There are women who awaken something sacred in a man, and there are women who pass through his life like rain over stone. He remembers one. The other he forgets. You may think it's your age, that your body's changed, your beauty's fading, your glow isn't what it once was. But I'm going to tell you something few dare to say out loud. Desire doesn't disappear because of how you look. It disappears because of how you touch. Not touch like technique. Touch like presence. Touch like prayer. A man doesn't burn because you reached for him. He burns because something in you saw him. Because your fingertips didn't just land on his skin. They whispered, "I know what you carry. I see what you hide. I remember what you forgot." That's the woman he can't forget. Not the loudest. Not the boldest. The one who felt him when no one else did. The one who touched the places that were never asked about, never named. You're here because something shifted. He stopped reaching for you. The spark dimmed. You feel invisible in the very relationship you used to light up. And you're asking the most honest question a woman can ask. What did I stop seeing in him? This is not a video about seduction. It's not a list of tricks or bedroom moves. This is a remembrance of the places where a man holds not just tension but truth, of the 5 forgotten doorways into his unconscious heart. Each of these 5 touchpoints holds a key, not to his arousal, but to his return, to the part of him that still wants to be loved without being needed, seen without being sized up, held without being handled. So if you're ready, not just to be desired again, but to awaken something ancient in him, then stay, because this isn't about touching his body. This is about touching the man behind the mask. Let's begin. Before we go further, you need to understand something few ever name, yet every woman senses when she's truly present with a man. Men do not fall in love with gestures. They fall in love with what awakens inside them in your presence. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who mapped the architecture of the soul, called this the archetypal mirror. When a man is near a woman with true presence, she becomes more than herself. She becomes a reflection of his anima, his inner feminine, the hidden aspect of his soul that longs for intimacy, beauty, tenderness, and truth. And when she touches him, not just physically, but symbolically, she doesn't just touch the man, she touches the myth inside him. You see, every man walks through life armored, not because he's cold, but because no one ever taught him it was safe to feel. So he hardens, he performs, he provides, he forgets. And every time a woman reaches for him in ways he's come to expect, sexual, superficial, or scripted, he retreats further behind the mask. Not because he doesn't want her, but because that kind of contact doesn't reach him. But there is a language older than words, a form of communication that speaks through fingertips and silence. A woman's presence, when it's grounded, sovereign, and true, has the power to do something no technique ever could. It bypasses the intellect. It bypasses the ego. It enters the body like memory. Why? Because his body remembers what his mind has long suppressed. Jung taught us that the unconscious is not just in our dreams. It lives in the body, in gestures, in muscle, in breath. Every spot I'm about to reveal to you is more than anatomy. It's an access point, a symbolic key to a forgotten part of his psyche. Let's make something very clear. When you touch these 5 places with real presence, not for outcome, not for reward, you awaken more than sensation. You awaken memory, not personal memory, but archetypal memory. The memory of being held without pressure, of being seen without performance, of being safe enough to feel. You're not seducing him, you're reuniting him with the part of himself he exiled. That's why some women are unforgettable, because they don't demand his passion, they reflect it. This is what Jung meant by projection. A man does not fall in love with you, he falls in love with what you awaken in him. If you become the mirror of his highest self, his unguarded, soulful, fully feeling self, he won't just desire you. He'll remember you in his bones. That's why touch matters. Not the kind that reaches for results, but the kind that transmits your essence. When your hand finds the right place, and you're still, and your energy isn't pulling or posturing, but simply witnessing, he begins to tremble. Not from lust, from recognition. It's not erotic, it's symbolic. And in a world where most men are starved for that kind of reflection, your presence becomes sacred. These 5 touch points are not chosen at random. Each one speaks to a different layer of the male psyche. One touches his burden, one touches his memory, one touches his defense, One touches his shame, one touches his mind. Together they form a quiet map, not to seduce him, but to invite him home to himself. And let me say this again, because it's the root of everything. You don't awaken a man by touching his skin. You awaken him by becoming the mirror where he finally sees his soul. So as we move into these 5 sacred spots, do not rush, do not expect, and most of all, do not try to be desired. Instead, become present, become curious, and remember, desire isn't created, it's uncovered. Now, let's begin with the first point, the place where his armor begins to crack. 1. The lower back, where his armor begins to crack. This is where it starts. Not in the eyes, not in the bedroom, but in the small curve of his lower back, the place just above his hips, just below the weight of the world. A man's lower back is where he carries. It's not just muscle and spine, it's every expectation ever placed on him. Provider, protector, performer. This is the first place his body tightens and the last place anyone touches without asking for something. You may think of it as physical, but symbolically it's his threshold. The border between burden and surrender. When your hand finds that curve, don't rush, don't caress with intent. Place your palm there, quiet, still, present, and say nothing. Because your silence will speak volumes. I know how long you've carried. I see what no one else notices. You're not asking him to do anything. You're not expecting him to become anything. You are simply with him, where his spine bends under years of silent pressure. Carl Jung would call this an encounter with the shadow. The buried, exiled part of him that silently screams for relief. When you touch his lower back with reverence, you touch more than flesh. You touch his unspoken exhaustion. And for a man who has been leaned on his whole life, that moment, when someone touches him without taking from him, that's when something in him begins to soften. You're not touching his body, you're cracking the armor around his soul. 2. The inner arm, where tenderness was left behind. Move with me now to the second place, the inner arm, soft, warm, and mostly forgotten. The part of him that has not been touched in years. The part that once knew innocence before it knew performance. You won't find power there. You'll find memory. Emotional memory. This is where he was once held as a boy, where someone guided him gently across a sidewalk, where he first felt safety without condition. But time turns tenderness into function. Touch becomes a transaction. And the inner arm, it vanishes from the map. So when you touch him here, don't do it with seduction. Do it with sacred neutrality. Let your fingers rest just above the elbow on the inside, not sensual, symbolic. Because this isn't a place for stimulation. It's a place for remembrance. When you touch him here, something primal wakes up. Not sexual, human. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine aspect within every man that longs to be nurtured, not just desired. When your touch lands here, gently, without asking anything in return, you speak directly to his anima. And the most wounded men, they need this the most, because they've been touched only to be used, never to be seen, never to be witnessed. And let me tell you something that will stay with you forever. A man may forget what you said. He may forget what you wore. But if you ever touch the inner part of his arm without needing anything back, he will remember that for the rest of his life. Because what you touched was not his skin. It was his longing to be enough without having to prove it. 3. The edge of the jaw, where power meets surrender. This one is different. The edge of the jaw is not about weight or memory. It is about trust. A man's jaw is where he holds his force, clenched teeth, silent words, unspoken needs. It's the edge between command and collapse. When a woman touches the outer edge of a man's jaw, gently from the side, it is one of the most intimate gestures he can experience. Not because it arouses him, but because it asks him to surrender his defense. This is a moment where you say with your silence, I could hurt you here, but I won't. I choose to protect you instead. And whether he says it or not, his body hears you. This is the part of his face closest to his mouth, his eyes, his truth. You are not just caressing his face, you are entering the threshold of his vulnerability. You are in the space where he can be destroyed or discovered. But here's the secret most women never realize. When you touch his jaw with reverence, not possession, you return him to a forgotten form of strength. Not the strength of dominance, but the strength to let go. Jung would say this is where a man meets the beginning of individuation, the journey back to his authentic self. You are not there to dominate, You are not there to seduce. You are there to stand beside his softness without shrinking from it. Let this touch be slow. Let it last no more than 3 seconds. Let your eyes meet his without smiling, without searching. And then pull away gently. Say nothing. He will blink. He will shift. He may not speak, but in that silence, you have just redefined what it means to be safe in a woman's presence. You didn't touch him to melt him. You touched him to show him that surrender doesn't mean weakness. It means he can finally breathe. These are the first 3 gates, and already something in you may feel different, because you're realizing this isn't about touch, it's about access. It's about seeing the map inside his body that even he forgot how to read. And as we continue into the places he never expected anyone to notice, remember, this is not a journey of arousal, it is a journey of remembrance. 4. Behind the knees, where his hidden vulnerability lives. This one, she never thinks to touch, and that's why it matters more than she can imagine. Behind the knees, soft, shielded, easily ignored. Not a place of strength, not a place of pride, but a place of quiet truth. Most men spend their lives being evaluated by what stands firm, his shoulders, his jaw, his stance. But no one ever asks, what's soft in you? What's tender? What have you tucked away, hoping no one would ever find? Behind the knees is the physical metaphor for all the things he's hidden. His shame, his fear, his failures, his unmet grief. When you place your hand there, not teasing, not sensual, just aware, you say with your presence, even what you hide from yourself is safe with me. Most women will try to connect through what's visible, but the ones who change a man's life, they touch what's invisible. And that's what this spot holds, the invisible story. The childhood wound he never gave a name. The softness that was punished, the emotion that was mocked. Carl Jung would call this the confrontation with the personal shadow, the rejected parts of the self, the emotions banished to the basement of the psyche. Touching behind his knees isn't about arousal, it's about redemption. If done with grace, your hand here can say, you don't have to hide the softest part of you anymore. I won't run from it. I won't use it. I will simply remain. And that act alone, that transforms everything. Not because he says thank you, but because something in him lets out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for decades. So next time he's sitting beside you, next time his legs are folded or still, run your hand once behind that bend. Don't linger. Don't perform. Just touch and mean it. Touch and witness. Because when you reach where others never have, you tell him what no words ever could. There is nothing in you I refuse to love. 5. The scalp, where his soul rests in silence. And now we arrive at the crown, the place not of pleasure, but of peace. The scalp, his head, his thoughts, his quiet torment. This is the space where everything churns, his doubt, his decisions, his guilt, his glory, his silence. Most women run their hands through his hair in moments of passion, but almost no one touches his head to hold him. To say, you don't have to think right now, you can just be. The scalp is sacred. It is where spirit meets form. It is the temple of trust, and it is so often starved. If you've ever wondered why your presence didn't land, why your efforts went unnoticed, perhaps it's because you kept trying to ignite him, but never thought to anchor him. Carl Jung taught that the final step in a man's psychological integration is the emergence of the self, the totality of who he is beyond roles, ego, or performance. When you place your hand on his head, not to ruffle, not to tease, but to rest, you are speaking directly to that self. You are saying, I see you, even when you're not performing, even when you don't have the answers, even when you're simply breathing. This touch must be done in stillness. Not seeking a reaction, not seeking closeness, but offering presence. Because when you touch his scalp with reverence, you awaken the deepest trust a man can feel. Not that he is desired, but that he is safe. And in that safety his walls lower, his thoughts slow, his soul exhales. It may be the gentlest gesture of all, but it is the one that says the most. You've now been shown the 5 points, not points of pleasure, but of permission. Permission for him to be seen, to be soft, to be whole. And every time you touch one of these sacred spaces with intention, you're not asking him to come closer. You're letting him return to himself. Now that you know the 5 places where a man awakens, not in lust, but in remembrance, it's time to speak of something more dangerous than ignorance. Performance. You see, it is better to never touch him at all than to touch him with expectation. Because once your gesture becomes a strategy, once your silence becomes a trap for reaction, you've broken the spell. The body is a sacred listener. It knows the difference between presence and pressure, between stillness and setup, between reverence and rehearsal. And a man, especially a man who's lived, can feel it, not in his skin, but in his nervous system, in the tightening of his chest, in the flicker of doubt that returns when he senses she doesn't see me. She needs something from me. If you touch him hoping he'll look at you differently, he won't. If you touch him hoping he'll say something, do something, give something, you've left your center. Because what touches a man's soul is not what you do, but why you do it. And here's the brutal truth. The need for outcome is the death of mystery. And a man cannot open in mystery if you've already decided what you want to get out of him. The women who awaken desire are not perfect. They are not the most beautiful. They are not the most polished. They are the ones who can sit in presence without reaching, without rushing, without running. They don't touch to get closer. They touch because they already are. There is a softness in them that doesn't beg. It remembers. You must understand, he didn't shut down because of you. He shut down because somewhere along the way, he learned that his truth wasn't welcome. And when you come to him with performance, you confirm that fear. When you reach for him with need, he recoils, not from you, but from the feeling that he must once again become what you expect instead of who he is. So let this be your turning point. If your body is tight with anticipation, wait. If your heart is hungry for validation, pause. If your fingers are searching for evidence, stop. Because the only touch that awakens a man is the one that doesn't ask him to change. You must touch him without agenda. You must touch him from a place that says, whether you open or not, I remain. That is what reteaches him to trust. That is what tells his nervous system, this is different. This is safe. This woman doesn't just want me, she sees me. And here's a wound you didn't know you were healing. Many men cannot remember the last time they were touched without being required to give something in return. Love, loyalty, words, sex, security. Every gesture they've received came with a silent invoice. So when you touch without need, without pressure, without performing for a reaction, you give him back something that was stolen in silence. His right to rest, his right to feel, his right to be held without holding everything together. And what he will feel in that moment, he may not be able to name, he may not speak of it, he may not even understand it. But his body will, his soul will, and he will look at you differently. Not because you awakened his desire, but because you gave his truth permission to stay. Let me tell you what that kind of woman becomes in his life. She becomes the one he cannot forget. Not because she wore the right thing, not because she said the perfect line, not because she touched him the way he liked, but because when she touched him, he remembered who he was. And that, more than sex, more than beauty, more than mystery, that is what men long for. To be felt, not managed, to be recognized, not impressed, to be loved at the soul level by someone who no longer needs his approval to know her own worth. So take this in. If he pulled away, it wasn't always rejection. It may have been recognition. He saw himself in you and it startled him. He didn't forget your touch. He just didn't know how to name what it stirred. He may never say it, but his body will remember you as the woman who didn't just reach for his desire, but held his truth without asking it to perform. And that, my friend, is where real intimacy begins. You made it here. That already tells me something about you. It tells me you weren't just looking for another tip or trick. You were looking for truth. Not the kind found in magazines, but the kind whispered to you in quiet moments, the kind your soul never stopped believing in. Because something in you always knew. You were never meant to beg for attention. You were meant to be a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reveals. You don't awaken a man by performing for his gaze. You awaken him by becoming the stillness in which he can see himself clearly, not as a role, not as a provider, but as a man who is still becoming. And if you remember nothing else from this journey, remember this. You weren't forgotten. You were formative. You didn't touch him to possess him. You touched him to return him to himself. And even if he couldn't name what stirred, even if he never found the courage to say, you made me feel something I thought I'd lost, his body remembers. His breath remembers. His soul remembers. Don't chase his attention. Ask instead, did my presence awaken his truth? Because true power isn't found in being desired, it's found in being unforgettable for the reasons that matter. So slow down. Come back to your center. Not the one that pleads, but the one that remembers. You've always had the power. You just forgot it doesn't live in performance, it lives in presence. Now, if something in you woke up today, if a part of your heart whispered, yes, this is the kind of woman I want to be, then let it be known. Write it in the comments below, not for me, but as a promise to yourself. 3 words: I choose presence. And if you know another woman who forgot her power, send her this video. Not to impress her, but to remind her she is not alone. This wasn't about skin, it was about soul, and the conversation has only just begun.